Elias Mercer stood in front of the massive glass doors of the Harborview Tower, the sharp winter wind pushing at his coat like it wanted to sweep him away. Behind those doors was his kingdom, Mercer Industries, a skyscraper filled with offices, boardrooms, and glass-paneled walls that reflected power and polished success. But tonight, the dazzling Christmas lights inside felt cold and distant, as if they belonged to someone else's story. He exhaled slowly. Another winter alone. At 42, Elias was successful enough that his name was splashed across business magazines, and his firm was admired by competitors. But in the quiet moments, like now, standing outside a lavish blind date dinner meant to be his holiday celebration, he felt the emptiness raw and personal. He had everything money could buy, except the one thing he wanted most. His phone buzzed. A message from his personal assistant, Camille. Table 5 is ready. They're expecting you. Expecting him. His chest tightened. Expecting was a generous word for a dinner he'd agreed to out of courtesy. A blind date arranged by a co-worker who swore it would turn his luck around. Luck hadn't changed in years. Still, Elias squared his shoulders and walked inside. The restaurant was warm, festive, and fragrant with rosemary and roasted chestnuts. A piano played softly in the corner as waiters glided between tables illuminated by candlelight. At table 5, a woman waited, poised, beautiful, immaculate in a deep emerald dress. She glanced up as he approached and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That smile was polite, not hopeful. Polite was a fair description of how the evening went. They exchanged small talk, spoke of weather and travel, discussed business careers as though they were reading from the same scripted lines. At dessert, she looked down at her untouched plate and said, softly, "I'm sorry, but I don't think we're right for each other." The words weren't harsh, just final. Elias nodded, accepting her decision with a courtesy he didn't fully feel. Dinner was finished in an awkward silence, the weight of disappointment heavier than his untouched wine. Outside, snow had begun to fall. He stood on the sidewalk, cold air stinging his face. The city buzzed behind him, carolers, late-night shoppers, but none of it felt real to him. It was as if he were watching life through a pane of frosted glass, close yet unreachable. He decided to walk, not want to go straight home. His feet guided him toward a small cafe he passed every day, a warm, brick-walled place with fairy lights strung in the windows. Elias stepped inside, expecting the comfort of solitude and a cup of black coffee. Instead, he saw her. She was sitting at a corner table by the window, a woman he'd never seen before. Her hair was ash blonde, loosely curled, and her eyes were focused on a notebook filled with scrawled lines. She wore a cozy sweater that looked soft enough to warm the entire room. She glanced up just as he crossed the threshold, and in that moment, frozen between snowflakes and soup steam, something shifted. She offered him a gentle smile. Not polite, not hesitant, just warm and sincere. "Can you stay for just one night?" she asked, her voice carrying a mixture of hope and quiet vulnerability. Elias blinked. Her question wasn't about his blind date. It wasn't about this afternoon. It wasn't even about him. It was about something deeper. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice steady but curious. She closed her notebook and didn't hurry. "I mean," she said softly, "can you stay here tonight, right now with me, just for one night? Not as strangers, not as two people who walked in off the street." Her eyes didn't ask for answers. They asked for presence, for understanding, for connection. And for the first time in a long while, Elias didn't look away. Elias Mercer was a man who had mastered his world, his company, his calendar, his decisions, with precision. But he had never mastered stillness. He had never learned how to sit quietly in his own heart's longing. Across from him, the woman who had asked the most unexpected question held no pretenses. She was Marina Blake, a freelance architect, visitor to this city only for the Christmas season, and a woman with a heart as open as the winter sky. Her eyes told stories of pain and resilience. Her smile held hope without naivete. And though she had just asked a strange question, a question about staying for one night, Something in her voice felt like a promise that perhaps tonight wasn't about one night at all. Elias ordered coffee. Black. Marina ordered tea. At first, their conversation was cautious, professional, polite. But as snow gathered thicker outside, their words began to unfold in unexpected ways. She talked about her work, designing spaces that brought joy to people's lives. He talked about his company's charitable programs, the frameworks, the principles. He was careful. She was candid. Then, a silence, not awkward, but reflective. Marina leaned in slightly. "Why are you really alone tonight?" she asked, her voice gentle but direct. Elias looked into his coffee. "I have a lot," he said simply, "but sometimes what you have isn't what you need." Her eyes didn't blink away. "That sounds like a story," she said. And in a way it was. Because behind the CEO title and the polished conference rooms and the dinner engagements, Elias Mercer was someone who had forgotten what it felt like to be seen, to be chosen, to be understood. Marina stirred her tea slowly. "Sometimes," she said, "we spend so long trying to fill spaces in our lives that we forget to sit with the quiet and really listen." Elias met her gaze, and for the first time that evening, maybe even this winter, he felt heard. Outside, snowflakes danced in the streetlights. The cafe was quiet now, the busy dinner rush long gone. Only a few patrons remained, a couple whispering across a table, an elderly man reading a newspaper, a barista cleaning up the last dishes. But at table 7, the one by the window, two people sat awake to something new. Not love yet, not even promise, but the first spark of possibility. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was simply brave. And sometimes, that's all it takes. Elias didn't know why he agreed to walk Marina home. Perhaps it was the way the snow had begun falling heavier, or the way her coat looked too thin for the night air. Or perhaps it was something far simpler, the quiet relief of not wanting to be alone anymore. They stepped out of the cafe together, the bell above the door chiming softly behind them. "I don't live far," Marina said, pulling her scarf tighter around her neck. "Just a few blocks." Elias nodded. "Same direction as mine." They walked side by side, their footsteps crunching softly against the snow-dusted sidewalk. Christmas lights glowed in the shop windows, casting warm reflections across the glass. The city felt gentler tonight, slower, quieter, as if it were holding its breath. "So," Marina said after a moment, "was that dinner business or personal?" Elias let out a small breath that turned into mist. "A blind date." "Oh." She glanced at him, not prying. "I'm sorry." "It's fine," he replied. It was polite. She smiled faintly. Polite is rarely memorable. He chuckled despite himself. "You're not wrong." They stopped at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. Elias noticed how Marina tucked her hands into her sleeves to keep warm, how she shifted her weight slightly from foot to foot. "You asked me something back there," he said. "In the cafe." She looked at him, curious. "Did I?" "You asked if I could stay for just one night." Her cheeks flushed slightly, though she didn't look embarrassed. "I didn't mean it the way it probably sounded," she said quickly. "I wasn't asking for that." "I know," Elias said, and he meant it. It didn't feel like that. She relaxed a little. "Good." The light changed, and they crossed the street. A few minutes later, Marina stopped in front of a modest apartment building. Old brick, warm lights glowing behind the windows. "This is me," she said. Elias nodded, suddenly aware of how quickly the night had passed. "I'm just up the hill." She hesitated, then looked at him again. "Would you like to come in?" she asked. "Just for tea. It's cold." For a moment, Elias considered declining. Habit told him to retreat, to return to the controlled solitude of his penthouse, to pour a glass of expensive whiskey and stare out at the city alone. But tonight, something felt different. "I'd like that," he said. Marina's apartment was small but warm, filled with soft light and the scent of cinnamon. A small Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated with handmade ornaments, paper stars, tiny wooden figures, strings of dried orange slices. "It's beautiful," Elias said honestly. She shrugged. "I don't usually decorate much, but It felt wrong not to. She set a kettle on the stove and gestured for him to sit on the couch. The cushions were worn but comfortable, a knitted blanket folded neatly over the armrest. "You don't live here full-time, do you?" Elias asked. "No," she said, pulling 2 mugs from the cabinet. "I'm here temporarily. I grew up nearby, but work takes me all over." "What kind of work?" "I design spaces," she said. "Homes, community centers, sometimes schools. Places where people are meant to feel safe." Elias smiled faintly. "That's very different from what I do." "You're the CEO type," she said lightly. "I could tell." He raised an eyebrow. "Was it the coat?" She laughed. "No. It was the way you looked tired but still tried to stand straight. That caught him off guard." The kettle whistled. Marina poured the tea, then sat across from him, curling her hands around the mug. "So," she said softly, "what do you do when you're not working?" Elias paused. "I work," he said. Then, after a moment, "or I sleep. Sometimes I pretend to rest." "That doesn't sound like much living." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the hum of the heater and the faint laughter of neighbors through the walls. "Christmas used to mean something to me," Elias said quietly. "Now it feels like a reminder of what I don't have." Marina listened, her gaze steady and kind. "My parents died when I was young," she said. "Holidays became complicated after that." "I'm sorry." She nodded. "I'll learn to make my own traditions, even small ones." She gestured toward the tree. "Like that. Like that." Elias leaned back slightly, feeling something unfamiliar settle into his chest. Not excitement, not desire, but comfort. Real comfort. The kind that didn't ask for anything in return. As the night deepened, the conversation flowed more easily. They talked about childhood memories, travel mishaps, dreams that had been postponed or abandoned. At some point, Marina glanced at the clock and frowned slightly. "It's late," she said. "You should probably head home." Elias nodded, then hesitated. "Would it be strange," he asked carefully, "if I stayed a little longer?" She studied him for a moment, then smiled. "Only if you wanted to be." He stayed. Not because of romance, not because of loneliness, but because, for the first time in a long while, he felt present. And that night, when Elias finally returned to his penthouse, the silence didn't feel quite as heavy, because somewhere across the city, a light was still on, and someone knew his name. Elias woke to the quiet hum of the city below his penthouse windows. Morning light filtered through the sheer curtains, painting pale gold lines across the floor. For a moment, he lay still, staring at the ceiling, feeling something unfamiliar tug at his chest. Not dread, not urgency, longing. The night before replayed itself in fragments. Marina's soft laugh, the way her apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon and pine, the calm that settled over him while they talked. Nothing dramatic had happened. No promises were made. And yet, something had shifted. He rolled onto his side and checked his phone. No messages. He wasn't surprised. Marina hadn't asked for his number. He hadn't offered it. There had been an unspoken understanding that whatever had happened was allowed to exist without expectation. And still, he wanted to see her again. At the office, Christmas decorations lined the lobby, tasteful, elegant, carefully curated. Employees exchanged holiday greetings as Elias passed, but he felt oddly disconnected, as though part of him was still sitting by a cafe window, watching snow fall. "Good morning, Mr. Mercer," Camille said as she handed him his schedule. "You have back-to-back meetings until 4, then the board dinner tonight." He paused. "Cancel the dinner." Camille blinked. "Sir, reschedule it," he corrected gently. "I need the evening." She nodded, though curiosity flickered briefly in her eyes. As Elias moved through meetings, he noticed how often his thoughts drifted. It frustrated him. He was used to precision, to focus. Yet no amount of discipline could stop his mind from returning to Marina's quiet honesty. During lunch, he found himself standing outside the same cafe from the night before. He hadn't planned it. The bell chimed as he stepped inside, the warmth enveloping him. The barista recognized him immediately. Back again, she asked with a smile. The usual? Elias hesitated. Actually, I'm looking for someone. Her expression softened knowingly. Ash blonde hair. Always writes in a notebook. His heart skipped. Yes. She comes in most afternoons, the barista said. Usually around 3. Elias checked his watch. 2:47 p.m. He ordered coffee and took a seat by the window, the same one Marina had occupied. Snow clung to the glass in delicate patterns. He told himself he was just curious. At exactly 3 o'clock, the door opened. Marina stepped inside, brushing snow from her coat. She paused when she saw him, surprise flickering across her face, followed by something warmer. Elias, she said softly. He stood. Hi. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she smiled. I was hoping you'd come back, she admitted. Relief washed through him, unexpected and profound. They sat together again, conversation flowing more easily this time. There was laughter now, teasing, familiarity blooming where uncertainty once stood. You look different, Marina said after a while. How so? Lighter, she replied, like someone who slept. He smiled. I did. She raised an eyebrow. I'll take partial credit. As afternoon faded into evening, Elias found himself reluctant to leave. But reality pressed in. His responsibilities, her temporary stay, the unspoken boundaries between them. Marina, he said finally, can I ask you something? She closed her notebook. Of course. What did you mean when you asked me to stay for one night? She didn't answer immediately. I meant, she said slowly, that sometimes people don't need a future promise. They just need someone to see them, fully, without expectations. He nodded. And if someone wanted more than one night? Her gaze met his, steady and thoughtful. Then they'd have to be honest. With themselves first. That night, Elias returned home with her words echoing in his mind. Honesty. It sounded simple. But honesty meant acknowledging how lonely he'd been, how carefully he'd built walls around his life. It meant admitting he wanted something he couldn't schedule or control. Over the next few days, they met often. Walks through snow-lined streets, shared meals, quiet conversations that lingered long after words faded. But beneath the warmth, a tension grew. Marina was leaving in 2 weeks, and Elias's life was rooted here. You're thinking again, Marina said one evening as they stood on a bridge overlooking the river, city lights reflecting like scattered stars. I always think, he replied. That's not what I mean. He sighed. I don't want this to end. She turned to face him fully. Then don't treat it like something temporary. That's easy for you to say. Her expression softened, but her voice remained steady. Is it? He hesitated, then said what he'd been avoiding. I don't know how to let someone into my life permanently. Silence stretched between them. I'm not asking for permanence, Marina said quietly. I'm asking for presence. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not a woman asking for security, but one offering courage. I'm scared, he admitted. She nodded. So am I. That night, Elias stood outside his penthouse window again. But this time, the city didn't feel like a barrier. It felt like a possibility. The closer Christmas came, the heavier everything felt. Elias noticed it in the way Marina lingered before answering certain questions, and how she stared a little longer at passing trains, packed suitcases in shop windows, departure boards glowing in the station downtown. And Marina noticed it in him too, the way his phone never stopped buzzing, the meetings that pulled him away mid-conversation, the subtle return of distance behind his eyes. Neither of them spoke about it. Not yet. They were standing in Marina's apartment kitchen when it finally surfaced, the kettle forgotten on the stove, steam curling into the air. Outside, snow drifted lazily past the window, coating the fire escape in white. You're leaving soon, Elias said, breaking the silence. Marina didn't turn around. Yes. How long? She hesitated. A few months. Maybe longer. The words landed heavier than he expected. And after that, he asked. She faced him then, her expression calm but guarded. After that, I don't know, Elias felt a familiar instinct rise, the need to protect himself by pulling back, by turning uncertainty into distance. "I can't do uncertainty," he said quietly. Marina's shoulders stiffened. "You live in it every day," she replied. "You just call it control." The kettle screamed, sharp and sudden. Marina turned it off, hands steady despite the tension between them. "I didn't come here looking for anything permanent," she continued. "But I also didn't come here to pretend this is nothing." Elias ran a hand through his hair. "You don't understand what my life is like." She looked at him, really looked at him. "I understand more than you think," she said. "I know what it's like to build something so carefully that there's no room left for anyone else." The truth in her words unsettled him. That night, Elias returned to his penthouse restless and conflicted. The space felt larger than usual, cold, echoing. He poured a drink he didn't want and stared out at the city, wondering how something so simple had become so complicated. The next morning brought a complication he hadn't anticipated. His board called an emergency meeting. A potential merger, massive, time-sensitive, and requiring his full attention over the next several months. Travel, negotiations, long nights. When the meeting ended, Camille lingered. "You should know," she said carefully, "this would require you to relocate for at least half the year." Elias's chest tightened. That evening, he met Marina at the cafe. She knew something was wrong the moment she saw his face. "You're pulling away," she said softly. "I got an offer," he replied. "A big one." She nodded. And it changes things." Silence stretched between them. "So this is where you decide?" Marina said. "Whether I fit into your life, or whether I was just a pause." "That's not fair," Elias said. "Isn't it?" Her voice didn't rise. That was what made it hurt more. He wanted to tell her she mattered, that she was different, that she had changed him. But wanting wasn't the same as choosing. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I don't know how to make space for someone without losing everything else." Marina reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "Then don't promise me anything," she said. "Just don't disappear." Christmas Eve arrived wrapped in silence. Elias spent the day at the office, pretending work was enough. Marina packed quietly in her apartment, folding clothes with deliberate care. That night, Elias stood outside her building, staring at the lit window he knew was hers. He didn't knock. He told himself he was giving her space. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was afraid. Afraid that if he stayed, he would have to change. Afraid that if he left, he would regret it. And somewhere between those two fears, Christmas passed. Not alone, but unfinished. Christmas morning arrived without ceremony. No laughter in the halls of the penthouse. No warmth drifting from a nearby kitchen. Just silence, polished, expensive, and empty. Elias woke before dawn, the city still dark beneath a blanket of snow. He lay in bed longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of traffic far below. For years, this kind of quiet had been familiar, comfortable even, but now it felt wrong. He checked his phone instinctively. No messages. Of course there weren't. Marina had never been someone to chase. She had offered presence, not persistence. And when he hadn't met her halfway, she had stepped back with dignity. Elias sat up slowly. He thought of her apartment, the small tree in the corner, the handmade ornaments, the way she brewed tea like it was a ritual instead of habit. He thought of how easily she had laughed, how carefully she had listened, and how he hadn't knocked. The realization settled in his chest with quiet weight. He hadn't chosen work. He hadn't chosen the merger. He had chosen fear. Later that morning, he walked the city streets aimlessly, hands buried in his coat pockets. Families passed him, bundled together, children tugging at gloved hands, couples sharing coffee and smiles. He felt invisible among them, a man moving through a world that no longer quite belonged to him. He found himself standing outside the cafe again. It was open, though quieter than usual. He ordered coffee and took their usual seat by the window. The barista offered a sympathetic smile, but said nothing. Snow continued to fall. Hours passed. Marina didn't walk through the door. That afternoon, Camille called. "You missed the board's holiday call," she said gently. I know. There was a pause. Are you all right? Elias looked out at the street, at strangers passing by with places to go. I don't think I have been, he admitted. When night fell, Elias returned home and poured himself a drink he barely touched. He wandered from room to room, every space reminding him of how carefully he designed his life and how little warmth it held. He thought of Marina's words. I'm not asking for permanence. I'm asking for presence. For the first time, he understood what she had meant. Presence wasn't about promises or timelines. It was about showing up, even when it was uncomfortable. Especially then. His phone buzzed. A message from an unfamiliar number. I'm leaving tomorrow morning. Just wanted to say, thank you for the nights that mattered. M. His breath caught. He typed, deleted, typed again. I should have knocked. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Yes, you should have. That was all. Elias didn't sleep that night. He sat by the window until dawn, watching the city slowly wake, knowing something essential was slipping away, not because it had to, but because he had let it. And as the sun rose on the day after Christmas, Elias Mercer finally understood something no boardroom had ever taught him. Success didn't mean never needing anyone. Strength didn't mean never choosing vulnerability. And love, real love, didn't wait forever. The city was just beginning to stir when Elias left his penthouse. Snow had stopped falling sometime during the night, leaving behind a quiet, glistening stillness. The streets were pale and clean, like a blank page waiting to be written on. Elias hadn't slept. He hadn't even tried. The message Marina sent him kept replaying in his mind, every word sharp and undeniable. Thank you for the nights that mattered. Past tense. That was what frightened him most. He didn't call his driver. He didn't check his calendar. He didn't put on the polished armor he usually wore to face the world. He pulled on his coat, grabbed his keys, and walked out with only one thought guiding him. He had waited long enough. The train station was already busy despite the early hour. Travelers hurried along the platforms, rolling suitcases behind them, clutching coffee cups and boarding passes. Announcements echoed overhead, each one sounding like a countdown. Elias scanned the departure board. Her train was listed, leaving in 40 minutes. He moved faster than he thought possible, weaving through crowds that barely noticed him. For once, the CEO of Mercer Industries wasn't important. He was just a man trying not to lose something precious. He spotted her near the far platform. Marina stood with her suitcase beside her, wearing the same coat she'd worn the night they first walked together in the snow. Her hair was pulled back loosely, strands escaping around her face. She looked calm, not sad, not rushed, just resolved. Elias slowed as he approached, suddenly aware of how exposed he felt. Marina. She turned. Surprise flickered across her face, followed by something deeper, something carefully guarded. You came, she said. I almost didn't, he admitted. And that's exactly why I had to. They stood facing each other as commuters flowed around them, the world rushing past while their moment stretched still. I'm not here to make promises I can't keep, Elias said. And I'm not here to ask you to wait for me. Her eyes searched his. Then why are you here? Because I realized something, he said quietly. I've spent my life preparing for the future and avoiding the present. And you asked me for one night, not forever, and I couldn't even give you that. Her jaw tightened slightly, but she didn't look away. I'm not afraid of change, he continued. I'm afraid of needing someone. And that fear has cost me more than I ever admitted. Marina folded her arms, a subtle shield. Elias, she said softly. I didn't leave because I wanted to. I left because I wasn't going to beg someone to choose me. I know, he said. And I'm not asking you to come back. I'm asking if I can come forward. She studied him in silence. The loudspeaker crackled overhead, announcing boarding for her train. Time was slipping. What does coming forward look like to you? She asked. It looks like this, Elias said. I turned down the merger. I told the board I wasn't relocating. Her eyes widened slightly. You didn't have to do that. I did, he said simply. For me. Because I finally understood that the life I built was impressive, but incomplete. She hesitated, emotion flickering across her face. And what about tomorrow? She asked. Or next month? I don't know. Elias admitted. But for the first time, I'm willing to find out with someone instead of around them. The final boarding call echoed across the platform. Marina closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. You're asking me to trust you, she said. I'm asking you to see me, he replied. Not as a CEO, not as someone who always knows the outcome, just as a man who is trying. She looked at her suitcase, then back at him, and then, slowly, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Elias exhaled, a breath he felt like he'd been holding for years. I don't know what this becomes, Marina said against his chest, but I'm willing to stay for now. He smiled, resting his chin lightly against her hair. For now is all I need, he said. The train doors closed behind them, and for the first time, Elias Mercer didn't feel like he was missing something. He felt like he was finally arriving. They didn't go back to the penthouse right away. Instead, Elias suggested breakfast at a small place near the station. Nothing elegant, nothing impressive. Marina smiled at the suggestion, and that alone felt like a small victory. They sat across from each other with steaming mugs between their hands, snow melting from their coats. For the first time since they met, there was no pretense hanging in the air. No countdown. No unspoken goodbye. Just two people deciding what came next. This doesn't erase everything, Marina said gently, stirring her coffee. I still have my life, my work, my plans. I know, Elias said. I don't want to absorb you into my world. I want to make space for yours. She studied him for a long moment, as if deciding whether that promise was real. In the weeks that followed, they moved slowly. Marina stayed, not in his penthouse at first, but in her own apartment. Elias insisted on meeting her world where it existed, not reshaping it to fit his. He learned her routines, her quiet rituals, the way she needed time alone after long days. And Marina learned Elias in return, not the CEO version that lived in headlines and boardrooms, but the man who forgot to eat when stressed, who woke too early from habit, who struggled to ask for help even when he needed it. They argued sometimes, about schedules, about boundaries, about how easily his work threatened to swallow everything else. One night, after he canceled dinner for the third time that week, Marina finally said it. I'm not competing with your career, she said, her voice steady but firm. I won't fight for space in someone else's life. Elias felt the weight of that truth settle deep in his chest. You shouldn't have to, he replied. And I'm sorry it took me this long to understand that love isn't something you squeeze in. It's something you build around. He started leaving earlier, delegating more, letting the world run without him for a few hours at a time. Nothing collapsed. If anything, his company grew stronger. So did they. Spring arrived quietly, softening the city. They took long walks through parks, just beginning to bloom. Elias learned how to be present without needing to control the moment. Marina learned how to trust without guarding every step. One evening, as they cooked dinner together in her small kitchen, Marina glanced at him and smiled. You know, she said, you don't feel like a man who's afraid anymore. Elias considered that. I think, he said slowly, I'm just finally tired of being alone. She reached for his hand. That night, as they sat together on the couch, city lights glowing beyond the windows, Elias realized something profound. Love hadn't arrived like a grand gesture or dramatic declaration. It had arrived quietly, through consistency, honesty, and the simple courage to stay. And for the first time in his life, Elias Mercer wasn't looking for an exit. He was looking forward. The following Christmas arrived without warning. Elias noticed it not because of meetings or headlines, but because Marina started humming while she decorated the small tree in their share apartment. The ornaments weren't expensive. Some were chipped, some mismatched. All of them carried stories. This one's from my childhood, she said, holding up a faded glass star. It survived 3 moves and 1 very bad breakup. Elias smiled, hanging it carefully. Last year, Christmas had found him alone in a penthouse too large for one person. This year, he stood in a modest living room filled with warmth, music, and the quiet comfort of belonging. The company was thriving, but it no longer defined him. He still worked hard. He still led with discipline and vision. But he had learned something no boardroom ever taught him. Success fell hollow if there was no one to come home to. Later that evening, as snow began to fall outside, Elias reached into his coat pocket. Marina noticed the movement and turned slowly. "What are you doing?" she asked, already smiling. "I'm choosing," he said. He knelt, not because tradition demanded it, but because the moment felt right. "I once thought love was a distraction," Elias said quietly. "But you showed me it's a foundation. You didn't ask me to change who I was. You asked me to be present. And that changed everything." Tears filled her eyes. "I don't promise perfection," he continued. "I promise honesty, effort, and staying, even when it's uncomfortable." He opened the box. "Marina, will you build this life with me?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, laughing through tears, "Yes." They held each other as snow fell softly outside, the city glowing beneath winter lights. And for the first time, Elias Mercer knew exactly what he had been missing all along. Not ambition, not success, but love, chosen, every day. If this story touched your heart, remember, sometimes love isn't about grand gestures, but the courage to stay when it matters most. Like the video, share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more emotional stories about love, second chances, and the moments that change everything. Because the right story always finds you at the right time.